Power dynamics. Introduction to colonial history. In order to create meaningful change, it is important to bear in mind the history and culture of low and middle income countries. Many of these countries are in the position they are in today due to centuries of colonization by European powers. We cannot understand present-day sustainable development without understanding the history of colonialism. So what is colonialism? Colonialism is the policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying it with settlers and exploiting it economically, as defined by Oxford Languages. The British colonisation of India. Over the course of the 18th to 20th century, European powers engaged in a scramble to grab land in less developed parts of the world. Forming colonies gave European powers access to more resources and control. But at what immediate and long-term cost? Let's take a look at an example: the British colonisation of India. The British consistently exploited resources and people of their colonies. For example, by 1900, there were around 4,000 tea estates in North and South India from which tea was taken and sold by the British. In the long term, this has had significant negative effects on India's economy, while allowing Britain to profit hugely. Britain also established their own rulers and ruling models in India, leading to significant violence and division. British rulers actively pursued a divide and rule policy in India. This meant they deliberately created and amplified divisions between existing groups, such as Hindus and Muslims, the two most prominent religious groups. This sometimes included giving certain groups preferential treatment, all to ensure that populations did not unite against the British rule. The impact of these policies still remain, seen in current tensions between Hindus and Muslims in India and Pakistan. Alongside this, British rulers and Christian missionaries imposed their culture and societal models on the Indian population, assuming that they were the objective right way. For example, Christian missionaries translated the Bible into both Bengali and Sanskrit and attempted to enforce its ideologies on the Indian people. Britain also heightened inequality by making English the national language. In India, British officials passed laws which allocated all money spent on education to English-speaking schools. This meant that local populations who couldn't speak English were held back or forced to relinquish their native language. This is still the case today. Why are we talking about this? It is vital to think about all these things when working in global development today. Many former colonies are still feeling the long-term consequences of being subject to Western influence, due to this notion of superiority and the apparent power dynamics. Throughout colonization, the Western world assumed they were acting as a savior to developing countries, but actually, they stunted development. While most of these countries are no longer colonized, some forms of development aid today can still maintain this colonial power dynamic. This is known as NeoColonialism. One example of neocolonialism is when richer countries or organizations offer loans to developing countries. While these loans can be helpful to developing countries, they can also be so large that they become difficult to repay. At this point, developing countries can become indebted to the richer countries or organizations providing the loan, and this can result in having to use land, resources, or labor to repay them. Ultimately, these forms of large loans don't enable sustainable change for the recipient countries, and often end up causing more long-term damage. When working with developing countries, it is essential to focus on equality and partnership. It is the job of international development practitioners to facilitate development with no personal, political, or economic motivations. We want to provide support so that developing countries can develop in their own way, not tied to any other country's culture or societal model. How does this relate to your work for Young Social Enterprise? All the issues raised thus far are relevant to all former colonies, as well as developing countries who have been subject to neocolonialism. Your task is to design a sustainable project in response to a scenario that represents challenges in Ghana and India. It is therefore important to consider power dynamics when brainstorming your own project ideas. Some specific points to consider include the following. It is essential not to view your project as saving anyone. International development aid is not about fixing or solving issues in another country, but rather about contributing to the efforts of local people to improve their own situation, on both a micro level in a local community and on a macro level in an entire country. As discussed in the sustainability mini-clip, international development work should be locally led. The best projects are designed by the community themselves, or by understanding the community's strengths and limitations as set out by the community. It is always important to listen to local community members. We should never assume that our knowledge is superior or that the Western way is the right way and works elsewhere. Local communities are best placed to help themselves, as they will know what they need and what works for them. International development work should be partnership-based between international and local organisations. These partnerships should be equitable pay and listening to the expertise of local communities and organisations. This is how the most effective projects work. When brainstorming your project ideas, you should actively challenge your Western assumptions. This may sometimes feel uncomfortable, but it is necessary for creating meaningful and sustainable change. Undoubtedly, global development interventions play a role in the development of countries like Ghana and India. However, it is really important to recognise exactly what this role entails. Global development interventions must come from a place of equality, partnership, and lack of personal agenda. By eliminating negative power dynamics and avoiding neocolonialism, we can help facilitate true long-term sustainable change.